Whiskers wasn't an ordinary cat. He wasn't extraordinary either, not in the flashy way that gets internet fame or earns a place in glossy pet calendars. But Whiskers had something special about him, the sort of quiet magic that only those who pay close attention can see. He belonged to no one and everyone in the sleepy village of Elderbrush. The cobbled lanes were his territory. The bakery his morning haunt, the schoolyard his afternoon nap spot. But he always returned to Miss Ellery's garden at dusk. Miss Ellery was 82, lived alone in a vine-wrapped cottage with a moss-covered roof, and talked to her roses as if they were old friends. Whiskers would sit on the garden wall each evening, listening to her stories of the past, of lost brothers, love letters buried in drawers, and memories that smelled of lavender and old pages. It was during one such evening, with the air rich from the peonies and twilight brushing gold across the sky, that Whiskers heard it. A whisper. Not Miss Ellery's, and not the wind. It came from the back of the garden, beyond the blackberry thickets, where an ancient gate sagged off its hinges and ivy wrapped itself like a secret. The whisper was faint, like a sigh. Curious, Whiskers leapt down, slinking through the undergrowth. The whisper came again, soft, sorrowful. And it said, "Come home." Whiskers pressed his ears forward, listening. The whisper was gone, but its echo lingered in his chest like a drumbeat beneath his fur. The garden gate had stood untouched for years, rust creeping along its hinges like a patient parasite. Most humans never noticed it anymore, and Miss Ellery always said it led to nothing but a patch of wild nettles. But now, the cat's instincts told him otherwise. He slipped beneath the twisted wood. The thorns clawed at his fur, but he didn't flinch. Beyond the gate was a strange quiet. The kind that lives in places long forgotten. The nettles had grown tall, but between them ran a narrow path of flattened grass, as if someone, or something, had been walking it recently. Whiskers padded along, alert, until he came to a clearing. In the middle stood the remains of a stone cottage, slouched like a tired traveler. Half its roof had collapsed. A tangle of roses climbed the walls despite the ruin. But what truly stirred the hairs on Whiskers' back was the smell. It was old, but not musty. Familiar, but not from this life. He stepped inside. Moonlight filtered through the holes in the ceiling, casting silver on the cracked floorboards. And then, another whisper. Whiskers. The voice knew his name. His ears shot up. The voice was clearer now, warmer, like the way Miss Ellery's voice softened when she talked to her roses. Help me remember. Suddenly, the cottage around him shimmered. For a moment. The crumbled stones reformed, the broken walls stood tall, and the fireplace flickered to life. But just as quickly, it vanished again. Whiskers sat still, stunned. Somehow, this forgotten cottage knew him, and wanted something from him. Whiskers didn't scare easily. He once stared down a badger near Elderbrush Creek, but this was different. The cottage had shifted, as though time itself had blinked. Still, he stayed. A pull in his heart urged him forward. He sniffed around the hearth. Cold ash. A scorched iron kettle. A locket, half buried in dust. With a gentle paw, he nudged it open. Inside was a faded miniature portrait of a girl, no more than 10, smiling with a crooked front tooth and freckles scattered like stars. Around the edges of the photo were tiny words, nearly rubbed away, "To my Maggie. Love, Mama." Whiskers blinked. Maggie. The name rang in his mind like a bell in a fog. The fireless hearth flickered for a second, as if warmed by the memory. And then, that soft voice again. "She's forgotten me. I am only stories now." Whiskers turned to the shadows. No one was there. But he understood something unspoken. This place was not haunted by something evil, but by something lost. The whispers were echoes of a forgotten soul, aching to be remembered. From the cracked windowsill, he spotted something unusual, a set of fresh paw prints, not his own, leading out of the room and into the woods beyond. The prints were lighter, smaller. Fox, maybe? But too round. Without hesitation, he followed. The trail led into the thickest part of Elderbrush woods, where fog slithered between tree trunks and the sun barely touched the ground. Half an hour later, he came to a wooden sign nearly swallowed by vines. It read, "The Memory Keeper's Path." Beside it sat an old crow, feathers streaked with silver. "You finally came," the bird said. Whiskers' tail puffed. Animals rarely spoke aloud, and even when they did, they weren't supposed to sound like librarians. "You knew I was coming?" Whiskers asked cautiously. "I've waited 70 years, the crow replied. "You are the one who can restore what was forgotten." Whiskers flicked his tail. "And who, exactly, was forgotten?" The crow's eyes glinted. "Maggie's mother. The woman who lived in that cottage." "But why, has she vanished like this?" Whiskers asked. The crow turned toward the trees. When a memory is lost entirely by all living beings, it fades into the veil. If no one remembers you, you don't die, you disappear. "And you think I can fix that?" The crow nodded solemnly. "You, Whiskers, are a memory walker. A rare gift. You carry the scent of many homes, the stories of many people. You are the last thread between the living and the forgotten." Whiskers was quiet. Then he sat, gave a small, thoughtful lick to his front paw, and said, "Well then, I suppose we better get to work." The crow's directions led Whiskers back toward Elderbrush, specifically, to a house just 2 streets over from Miss Ellery's. It was a tall brick home with blue shutters and a porch swing that squeaked with the wind. Whiskers had passed it hundreds of times. He'd even napped beneath the azaleas once. But he had never noticed the girl who lived there. Now, he did. She sat by the window in a pale yellow sweater, her fingers twisting a string bracelet, eyes lost in a distant gaze. Her face looked oddly familiar. The crow landed on the branch beside Whiskers. "That's Maggie's granddaughter." Whiskers stared. "She looks like the girl in the locket." "Memories run in the blood," said the crow. "Even when they're buried." Whiskers waited until dusk. When the girl left her room for dinner, he slipped through the open window, landing silently on her wooden floor. Her room smelled of lavender and pencil shavings. Books lined the shelves, and tucked beneath the windowsill was a small white desk. The drawer stuck halfway when he tried to pull it with his paw, but after a few tugs, it gave way with a click. Inside were old photographs, a pressed violet, and a stack of yellowed letters tied with ribbon. Whiskers carefully nudged the top one open. The handwriting was faded but legible. "My sweet Maggie. If you ever feel alone, look to the cottage. Love is never lost. Just waiting to be remembered." The signature had smudged into a ghost of ink. Suddenly, a breeze fluttered the curtains. Whiskers turned. The photograph that had been buried beneath the letters now lay face up on the floor. It was a picture of the old stone cottage, before it crumbled. Standing at the door was a smiling woman with a braid down her shoulder. Whiskers' heart jumped. The woman's eyes looked like Miss Ellery's, but softer. Younger. The crow landed again on the sill. Maggie was Miss Ellery's sister. The little girl in the photo? That was Miss Ellery when she was 10. Whiskers froze. Then the crow added, "She never told anyone. She forgot, too. Time does that. But her heart remembers." Whiskers looked back at the drawer. In it, the letters began to glow faintly, as if remembering gave them power. The crow gave a satisfied squawk. "You've unlocked the first memory. But more is needed. We must find the keystone memory, the moment that bound them all." Whiskers narrowed his eyes. "And where do we find it?" The crow hopped onto the floor. "At the place where her heart last beat." Whiskers knew where that was. The cottage. Whiskers and the crow returned to the clearing beneath a veil of starlight. The old stone cottage was just as they'd left it, cracked walls, twisted vines. A hearth as cold as silence. But now, something was different. The air pulsed. A low, rhythmic thump-thump, like a distant heartbeat, trembled beneath Whiskers' paws. It came from beneath the floor. "The cottage is remembering," whispered the crow, eyes gleaming. "We're close." Whiskers padded toward the fireplace. The soot-stained stone seemed to shimmer. He placed one paw on the hearth, and the thumping grew louder. Thump-thump. Thump-thump. A section of floorboards in the corner rattled. Carefully, Whiskers scratched at the edges. The old wood lifted like a lid, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside, a red velvet journal, brittle with age. On the cover, "For Maggie, with all my heart." He opened it gently. Each page was a memory. A pressed daisy labeled "First Day of School." A drawing of two girls playing with a wooden dollhouse. A recipe for raspberry scones, with Ellery's favorite, scribbled in the margin. A page with a single sentence. "If the world forgets us, may this book remind it we were once love." And on the final page, a letter. "Dearest Maggie, if you are reading this, then I am only in memory. That's okay. Love does not vanish. It waits quietly, like a cat at your door. You were my sunlight in every storm. I hope you find this someday, and remember, the cottage was never bricks or stone. It was the home we built inside each other." Whiskers felt something stir in the air, warmer now, softer. The fireplace sparked. A flame, small and golden, danced to life. Then a voice, full and clear, echoed. "Ellery, you remembered." And for a moment, just a moment, the cottage glowed. The cracked walls reformed. The roses on the windowsill bloomed. And at the door stood a woman in a sundress, her hand pressed to her heart, tears running down a smiling face. The crow bowed. The keystone memory is restored. But Whiskers didn't move. He stared at the woman. She looked just like Miss Ellery, but younger. The memory of Maggie's mother was alive in this place. Not to haunt it, but to bless it. Then the woman spoke again, not to Whiskers, but into the wind. "Ellery, if you find this book, I love you. I never stopped." The fire crackled softly, casting warm flickers on the newly awakened cottage walls. Whiskers sat silently at the hearth, eyes wide, absorbing the glow not just of flame, but of memory fully returned. The woman, Maggie's mother, stood quietly near the door, not quite real and yet not ghost. She was more like a song remembered after years of silence. And then she turned to Whiskers. "Thank you," she whispered. Her voice was steady now, no longer a cry for help, but a balm. "But it's not finished." Whiskers tilted his head. "What more is needed?" She stepped forward, holding the velvet journal in her hands, and reached into the last page. From it, she pulled a folded piece of paper sealed with wax. "The final letter," she said. "It must reach Ellery," in her hands. Whiskers padded forward as the memory woman placed the envelope gently on the rug before him. The second he touched it with his nose, the entire room shimmered, like water rippling in reverse. And then the fire went out. The woman faded with the embers, smiling all the while. Whiskers was alone again. But the letter remained, very real beneath his paw. Outside, the first light of dawn broke over the trees. Back at Miss Ellery's garden, the air was filled with birdsong. Whiskers leapt through the open window just as she was stirring in her rocker. "My stars," she said, blinking. "You've been gone all night." Whiskers hopped onto her lap and dropped the letter onto her knees. She stared at it. Slowly, her hands reached forward. The wax broke. She unfolded the page with care, and as she read, tears filled her eyes, quiet and glistening. She touched the inked words as if they were skin. "Dear Ellery, I never forgot you. Even when time tried to erase us. I kept you in every garden, every cup of tea, every song I hummed into Maggie's hair. I hope you found your way home. I hope you remember me now. I love you. I always did. Your sister, Anne." Ellery clutched the letter to her chest and let out a small, broken sound, half sob, half laugh. "Oh, Annie." Whiskers nuzzled her hand gently. She looked down at him. Her eyes soft but clearer than they'd been in years. "You brought her back to me." Then, like magic, the wind lifted, and from it came a scent, lavender and daffodils and raspberry scones. The scent of memory. The cottage had been restored in the heart that needed it most. And Whiskers, silent and warm in her lap, purred like thunder. Summer gave way to early autumn, and in the town of Elderbrush, the trees turned to fire, amber, crimson, and gold. But something else had changed, too. Not loud, not sudden, but felt. Miss Ellery's eyes sparkled more now. She whistled again when she pruned her roses. She began baking raspberry scones, always placing one out on a plate for an old friend. As she called it. The red velvet journal sat in a wooden frame by her bedside. And as for Whiskers, he changed as well. He still took naps on garden stones and chased butterflies in the wind. But every few nights, he'd wander back toward the old garden gate. It no longer looked rusted and forgotten. Now, roses wound around it. And if you peeked through the brambles, you could just see the outline of a small cottage, mended and upright. Smoke rising from its chimney. Light glowing from its windows. But no human ever found it again. Only Whiskers did. And sometimes, the crow. He'd sit on the windowsill of the restored memory and listen as laughter echoed from the walls, Maggie's mother baking bread, little Ellery playing with her toy squirrel, the hum of a lullaby long since sung. Whiskers became something more than a house cat. He became the guardian of forgotten things. Whenever someone in town misplaced a precious photograph, a wedding ring, or an old letter, it somehow found its way to Miss Ellery's porch. She'd placed them in a little box beneath her begonias labeled, "Memories Returned." And folks would come, one by one, to reclaim what they thought was lost. No one ever suspected the cat. But if you watched closely, you'd see Whiskers sitting quietly on the edge of the porch, eyes bright. Tail curled neatly, watching the world remember itself, one piece at a time. And on the coldest nights, when the stars shone like silver eyes in the sky, the wind would carry a whisper through Elderbrush. Nothing is truly lost, if someone still remembers.